we're really happy to have Jasper here. We're just going to have a conversation about the new movement for Black Lives, as Jasper has referred to it, and sort of the state of this racial moment in our country, and sort of how we all might fit into it, and what we can do to contribute. So Jasper, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And everybody, just so you know, we have your video off if you're out there in cyberspace. No offense, we just want you to be able to focus on Jasper mainly. If you want to, you can go up, if you're new to Zoom, you can go up and switch to gallery view, or you can go to that or speaker view, depending on your preference, and you should just be able to see Jasper and myself. So I'll just mention really quickly at the beginning, for the sake of this talk, there will be a few things we're kind of assuming that everyone's on the same page about. One of those things is that racism does exist. This is a real thing that people experience and that people perpetrate. And also that there is structural oppression and disadvantages built into the fabric of our society that disproportionately affect Black people. And also, for the sake of this conversation, we're also talking about, yes, Black Lives Matter has become a very big movement, and Jasper will, I'm sure, speak more about the state of that movement. But we're speaking about it as basically an umbrella under which many people from many different backgrounds are trying to improve the state of affairs and create greater equality and equity for Black people. And we'll just leave it at that, and I'll let Jasper, if you want to add anything to that, you can. So I'll just start by saying, Jasper, baby, if you could kind of put this moment where we are right now in the history of struggle for civil rights for Black people in perspective. I mean, how does this moment compare to, say, the civil rights movement in the 60s? And how would you kind of characterize where we are now? How is it different? How have things evolved recently?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, the biggest difference is the Black Lives Matter movement is decentralized, which means that it doesn't follow any national leadership. It's hyper-local activism under a national umbrella. However, the Black Lives Matter movement has grown so substantially over, you know, since its inception, that now it has become an actual global movement. And so I'd say that that's an extremely big difference of what the civil rights movement was, you know, back in the 60s and moving into the 70s. I think the other part of this is that the global aspect of the Black Lives Matter movement is an actual movement for everyone who falls under the African diaspora. So it really does encompass Black and brown individuals, essentially individuals who find themselves in some varying form of oppression due to white systemic structures that are in existence, and, you know, are basically all the systems and things are born out of that system. So with that said, the civil rights movement was a national movement, and really it was very localized on wanting to end segregation and then to receive voter rights. So it was very streamlined in its approach, and, you know, so the things that are similar is that they are both nonviolent. And, you know, there's been a lot of things that have gone on over the past few months since the uprising has began. And I think that, you know, between COVID and people having to be on lockdown, and then, you know, the murder of 3 innocent Black people with no justice in a matter of, you know, I think 3 weeks. It was the perfect storm for a lot of people to just get out and be angry and really had enough of this. But, you know, unfortunately, there are people out there who, you know, they're not there for the movement, and it's very difficult to decipher who those people are because these movements are so big. But, you know, I think it is very important for people to understand that at its core, Black Lives Matter started as a hashtag. It was a hashtag because Trayvon Martin, at the time, 13-year-old boy, had Skittles, got killed by the police, and his, you know, the officers went free. And the sadness that encompassed, I think, you know, the Black community after seeing all of these things so often with no justice. And it was really a love letter. And it was just basically simple. It was like hashtag Black Lives Matter, period. And that hashtag grew into, it's not just a movement, it's more than that. It's really it's the necessity of having to say that Black Lives Matter, because for all intents and purposes, when you look at this structural oppression, you really have the evidence that we don't matter, and that, you know, we're constantly decriminalized, and our rights and protections that we should be receiving under the law are for the most part always undermined. And you know, all of this stems from one basic aspect, and that's that the forefathers, the founding fathers of this nation, the reason why they were able to enslave us was because they were able to look at us as non-human. We were dehumanized. So that's why when people are just like, well, all lives matter, it's like, yes, all lives do matter, but white people were never put in the position where they were completely dehumanized. And even to this day, we can see very clearly that there are different levels of justice systems. There are, you know, you can see a Black girl, I think she was like 16 years old. They put her in jail because she cheated on her online schoolwork. But then you have people who basically can get away with anything that they want to if they're white or if they're rich, you know. So the problem with this is that we essentially have 2 systems of justice, but only one governor. And I think that that's really, you know, the overall encompassing vibe of why you're seeing what you're seeing right now. This is, you know, this is not just a brand new thing. This is literally 400 years of generational oppression that has come to a head because we are in a system that no longer works. COVID, I mean, it's never worked for people who were, you know, basically not in the position of power. But now with COVID, we really do see the glaring differences of what we're expected to do and to be as people of color in this environment where we have, you know, 80% of all new COVID cases are Black people or people of color. And then we're considered essential workers. So now not only are we getting COVID at faster rates, but now we're also being forced to go back to work. We have lack of access to healthcare. So it's basically, you know, for all intents and purposes, this is violence. And this is something that's not new for Black Americans. This is something that's gone on. It's various levels of violence in different iterations. And that's why we're here today.
Yeah. So you said something the other day when we were talking yesterday that I thought was a good explanation. And you were basically talking about the notion of privilege and what that could mean. And you talked about you talked about the state you wake up in versus the state, say someone like me or someone else who might be white, older, what have you, that they wake up in every day, and the level of choice there of what we have to deal with on a daily basis. Could you say anything about that explanation of sort of this notion of what is privilege in this racial context?
Right. So privilege is, okay, first of all, I will just say that for folks who want to understand about privilege, and I know that there are some questions that, you know, that encompass that umbrella term, which is like white fragility and things of that nature. There is a book called White Fragility. I would suggest that you read it because I think that it's a good place to start if you haven't. But essentially, you know, the definition of white fragility is the discomfort and defensiveness on the part of a white person when confronted by information about racial inequality and injustice. So, you know, the biggest thing I think between people of color and non people of color is that you have the opportunity to opt out. You can opt out of watching the news. You can opt out of being concerned about, you know, any type of uprising or standing for the rights of people who, you know, are being oppressed by these systems or having our constitutional rights undermined and you know, the protections that we should be receiving under the law. You can opt out of those systems. And unfortunately, that's just not the case for anyone else. And I think the biggest thing is that there's been this overarching conversation about people who see themselves as, you know, white, nice people, you know, nice white people, which, you know, I'm not trying to take anything away from that, but what this is more so about is the fact that white privilege is about the structural aspects of culture and society. And so because those particular systems are all rooted in the foundation of white supremacy, and on top of that, then you also have, let's just say, for example, white men are in control of most of those systems. They're in control for the most part of making the law. So now you're looking at the fact that it's like, even though you might not be out in the street and, you know, calling Black people derogatory names, the fact of the matter is that you are still benefiting from these systems if you are white. And so the biggest thing right now is that, you know, we don't just need allies, or people who think that they're not racist. What we need are people who are actively anti-racist, which means that implies that you're using your privilege to dismantle the structural system of oppression, because the system is owned by white people. And so because of that, we cannot dismantle racism or these structures on our own. We need for white people to actively engage in using the privilege that comes with being white to dismantle this in any way that they can. So, you know, that's really the biggest issue of kind of getting folks to understand that it's, you know, we're not trying to say that you're bad people. This is really about the fact that we need you to understand that this is a numbers game. And until we get everybody out into the streets, this is going to be an issue for people of color, and we will continue to be oppressed, and we will have to continue to go out into the streets and fight for our constitutional rights and protections when we shouldn't even have to. And I think that, you know, overall, everybody should be concerned. You know, what we've been witnessing over the past month, you know, tear gassing citizens, rubber bullets, these things shouldn't be happening at all. And so, you know, it's an aggressive push of power to essentially intimidate those individuals who really see, specifically white individuals who really see their part in dismantling this. And that's the reason why we've seen, you know, the aggression from the police and, you know, from these shady federal characters. I mean, these things should not be happening. Everybody should be up in arms right now that this is the reality that we're living in. And so this is not just a Black issue, but it does come down to being something that we're standing for because we're taking the brunt of this type of behavior.
Right. And when you use that phrase, using one's privilege, when you talk about that, I'm wondering if we could get some more concrete ideas as to what might that look like? It could take many forms, but
Sure.
what might that look like? Our crowd here today is predominantly over 65 for the most part, and largely white. And for people in that crowd or for their friends who may be younger, maybe from all kinds of different backgrounds, what does it mean in action to use one's privilege? How can people actively be involved in dismantling these systems that uphold oppression? Are there some specific steps you might suggest for this older group, and also just for allies in general?
Sure. So let me just back up for a minute just to kind of give a brief definition of the concept of white privilege, because white privilege it's very specific, you know, because I hear, you know, you'll hear a lot of people be like, oh, I'm poor, I was raised in, I live in a shack down south, and, you know, I'm on the Appalachian Trail. I don't have privilege. What are you talking about? And so I want to just have people understand that the concept of white privilege is an unseen, unconscious advantage. So it's important to understand that it's both a legacy and a cause of racism. So when you're, say, for instance, at Thanksgiving dinner, this is the time, you know, when we're talking about dismantling and being an ally, that means really taking up that space to stand for the truth of the legacy of America and its racist background and history of genocide and perpetual oppression. And if you stand in the truth of that, then that's kind of what gives you the foundation to stand when you're, you know, if you hear racist jokes, don't laugh. Don't be quiet. You know, when grandma says something, you know, about the Black person down the street and she doesn't use the right words, correct her. You know, like, these are the things that, you know, have been kind of like, it's been part of the culture. It's, you know, we're just joking around. But the fact is that this is nothing to joke about. This is nothing to laugh at. The structural oppression of groups of people are not funny. We are in a position where we have perpetually been in the position where we have no legacy of financial wherewithal, the ability for us to access appropriate education and healthcare. All of these things have played a role in essentially weakening Black communities and, by and large, our nation. And it has really created a severe divide between those who have access and those who don't have access. And that's really what we're facing right now. You know, everyone's asking, you know, where do we go? What do we do next? And honestly, this is, I say this all the time, you know, the bottom line of the legacy of America for me is simple. You can have an engine. White people can be the engine, but the literal millions of gallons of Black blood that has been spilled to create the systems that we have in this nation is the gas. You can have the best car, you can have the best engine, but if you don't have gas, it's not going to go anywhere. And so we, as the collective we of Black people, have never had our just due. We've never had reparations, and which is, it shouldn't be, because we do actually have a legacy of paying reparations to certain groups of people within our nation. We gave reparations to Japanese people after the Japanese internment camps. So it is something that can be done. It's just something that we collectively have never really pushed to adopt. And honestly, I think that this is where we are in our history. I think that this is the time. And so using your privilege is, like I said, it's an active thing. And it should be an active thing just as much as when I wake up in the morning, I'm Black. When I go to sleep at night, I'm Black. I can't change these things, right? I can't opt out from being Black. And so the mindset of using your privilege has to kind of be shaped within this understanding of, I'm white, and so I know that I have specific power, and so I'm taking the responsibility upon myself to be able to stand up in the space of that and to challenge it, because that's the reason why it's still here. That's the reason why we're still going through it, is because complacency does equate to violence. And you know, that's the reality of it all, period. If you're complacent, then you are actually perpetuating more harm for those individuals within your community who are underserved and marginalized. And it's going to take white people shifting their understanding of the responsibility that they have to use their privilege in any way that they can. And of course, you know, I can't mention every single way here, of course, but you know, these are the basic things, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I hear some of the things you mentioned, such as correcting people in conversation, and about, you know, interpersonal relations. I hear those things. And I'm curious also about if you have suggestions about political steps people can take, actions that people could take, ways they can use, say, their skills. If you have a special skill, or if you have a way to reach a certain group of people. Do you have any more thoughts on kind of those kind of outreach beyond your circle in order to further this cause?
Sure. I mean, well, the obvious way is to donate, right? The biggest disparity in this nation is focused around financial inequity. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of organizations out there that are doing really good work, and could use those financial dollars. Specifically for me, because I understand that I am, you know, part of the LGBTQ plus community, and unfortunately, Black queer youth are often more homeless at a higher rate than any other, and so I often, you know, I tell people that they should definitely be looking to donate to organizations within their communities that look to help, you know, give that support to queer homeless youth. And, you know, I just basically say, you know, go from the bottom up, you know, look at the ones who are the most underserved in your communities, and then you try to see what you can do to, you know, to build up that presence. You know, the other thing is volunteering. You know, volunteering is a huge way to be helpful. I know Ryan and I were discussing for my organization, Activism Articulated. We are specifically an advocacy communications group. And we have built campaigns, and we run our organization. We're not a nonprofit, but the advocacy work that we do, you know, we take on clients pro bono every quarter. And, you know, that's part of the way that we are able to get communication skills out to those individuals who wouldn't necessarily be able to financially afford good communication or crisis help. So for me, you know, those are the two big things. And the third thing is, you know, city council, being involved with your local community, city council, understanding the agenda, understanding, and, you know, I will say first, you know, looking at the police within your communities and understanding what's there in terms of the contracts and what's in those contracts and in the agreements. Because honestly, for me, I spent the last 2 years trying to understand why Black people were being killed and there was no justice. And so I spent the last 2 years working on a campaign called the Black Bill of Rights. And the Black Bill of Rights I started with policing because, you know, data and analysis do dictate that you know, the most important issue right now for Black Americans is policing. And so I went through the rabbit hole and interviewed folks. I interviewed lawyers, I interviewed policy folks, I spoke to families across the nation who have lost loved ones at the hands of the police. And I really found out that, you know, the reason why cops go free, it's not because of the DA, it's because of the fact that there are agreements and contracts in place that offer leniencies that allow for these cops to go free. Like, for example, qualified immunity. A lot of people don't understand what qualified immunity is, but it's one of the main reasons why cops go free. And it essentially states that you can't sue law enforcement. Now, if we know anything about the Constitution, there are actually clauses within the Constitution that specifically state that no man is above the law. And it goes further on to say that police, law enforcement, should not have more rights than the people that they serve. And so qualified immunity, the doctrine itself, shouldn't have even been created in the first place. The fact that it actually exists is unfathomable because it really does just completely undermine our ability to have basic checks and balances within our communities. The other thing is the Police Bill of Rights. The Police Bill of Rights, it's not a constitutional document. And, you know, depending on where which state it's in, I believe that the Police Bill of Rights are in 15 different states within our country. A lot of people don't really need it because they have their police union contracts, and the police union contracts often give enough leniencies to police officers so that they don't need a Bill of Rights. But the fact of the matter is the Police Bill of Rights is actually an administrative document that can hold anywhere between 5 to 10 different leniencies. And when you put all of those things together, that's another reason why a lot of police officers go free. Police union contracts, another reason why. These things are written into the contracts themselves. So when you're in a community and your community is talking about police reform, and they're not bringing up qualified immunity, they're not bringing up the Police Bill of Rights, they're not bringing up their police union contracts, that's a problem. Because what it really means beneath the surface is that they're not interested in true police reform. And that's really what we're looking for right now. We're looking for true reform and really looking at those things and shedding light on those aspects that are essentially like agreed on behind closed doors. And a lot of the time that has to do because of campaign financing. Unfortunately, that's the way that our governments are run, both on a federal and a local level. You have to be able to raise a certain amount of financial wherewithal to even be put into that position of power, which then essentially has those individuals beholden to special interests. And so they basically, they put it to chance. Every community that has a Police Bill of Rights, that's what happens. I don't know if any of you have heard about the Breonna Taylor case, but those officers have not been brought in. The reason why they haven't been brought in is because of qualified immunity. Qualified immunity essentially states that they did nothing wrong. it allows them to kill people on the job as part of the job. So even though it's completely, they weren't supposed to have the warrant, they ran in there with full, plain clothes. Her boyfriend thought that someone was trying to break into their house, shot down at the ground, and they still arrested him. All of this stuff is completely not even seen as being something wrong. A police officer will be put in jail faster for fraud, financial fraud, or driving while intoxicated, something happening. They'll go to jail faster for that than for killing an innocent civilian within their community. And we pay their bills. And not only that, there's no transparency. So, again, for folks who are there, who really want to be involved, these are the things that you need to be educating yourself on. And these are the things that you have to be looking at when your local leaders are saying that they're looking, to create police reform. This is the realness of what we're facing right now. We are perpetually having our rights undermined by the people in charge. And again, this should really be across the board a concern for every American, every citizen. This is not just a Black issue. It, however, becomes more of a Black issue because we know that Black people are more disenfranchised and criminalized and over-policed. So because of that, we do bear the brunt of these issues. But if you want to do that, that's really the key. City council, you're able to get on the phone, you get in the queue, you have friends who are also involved with this, you can get your messaging right, you can all have the same talking points, and you just really just go through the process and say, hey, you need to talk about this, because honestly, I do a lot of work in our community. I'm on a lot of boards, and our mayor is going for a strong mayor right now. And he essentially created this act, and he convoluted all of the, well, not all of them, but many of the police reform aspects that we've been asking for since 2018, which was when Stephon Clark was killed in our community by police. He was killed in the backyard of his grandmother's backyard. He had a phone, he wasn't armed, they thought it was a phone, they just fully shot him up in the backyard. And so these reforms we've been trying to get done and passed for 2 years. And then here we are today, now he's trying to put those reforms inside of the document of strong mayor. And it doesn't have to be, but see, this is what's happening on the political front in our communities. And so it behooves all of us to know what our political leaders are doing, who they're getting their campaign financing from. Are they allowing these particular contracts to be agreed on? Who says yay and who says nay? Because ultimately, they know that when these contracts are signed, they are signing away our constitutional rights and protections, and it has to stop.
So, and you also mentioned the signing of petitions. I believe you had a petition you were particularly involved in. Would you like to say anything about that?
Sure, yeah. So when I started to roll out the Black Bill of Rights, just to give a brief explanation, the Black Bill of Rights was really created, like, first and foremost to speak to aspects of policing that weren't really being looked at. So again, Police Bill of Rights, qualified immunity, and stuff like that. But it's ultimately a template designed for community action and input, and it's meant to eradicate the discriminatory policies and practices faced by African Americans across the board. So it's not just about policing. We're looking for reforms in everything, such as education, healthcare, personal financing, and wealth management. Like, these are all the things that this is for. And so I created a petition, and we're actually looking to forward it to Kamala Harris because we want her to endorse the concept of the Black Bill of Rights. And, ultimately it really is the opportunity for not only Black Americans, but for everyone to reimagine what these systems could look like if they were truly equitable. And the way that we have to do that is that we have to literally go through every single sector, every single job, every single, practice in terms of what your procedures and processes are. All of these things need to be re-examined, reimagined, and revised. And so that's what the Black Bill of Rights is. That's the reason why we created this petition, so that we can get Kamala Harris to sign on, specifically too, because, since I think it's down to the 2 last VP picks, right? So, I'm sure that many of you know that she, her track record as a DA, I'm sorry, her track record for her past and, stuff of letting people go free in California. And, so a lot of people are kind of looking at her a little bit weary. They're like, oh, we don't know if we really trust her. But I mean, for all intents and purposes, she actually really, I think that she would be a fantastic VP pick. And I think that having this in front of her would help to actually move this process along in terms of bringing the type of equity that we really need, the sweeping justice change, not just this incremental stuff that we've been dealing with for generations, because that's what's necessary.
That's great. And so at some point, I think we'll get that up in the chat. I'll try to, I'm not sure if I have that link, Jasper, but we'll figure that out before the end of the talk today and get it up in the chat for you.
Okay.
And I also put up in there a list, this is not anyone's specific recommendation, but it's a list that was presented to me of basically researched groups that have been awarded or recognized as progressing or helping the cause of social justice, especially for Black and brown people. It's just another link you can check out, and we'll share more of those before the end today. And we'll leave it open at the end to the chat. So if anyone wants to kind of go back and find some things and write them down, you can do that. So before we go to people's questions in a little bit here, Jasper, I wanted to ask you, I think everything you were saying about the police, it brings to mind for me, I've heard a couple people say or express concern about this phrase. This is kind of a two-part question, I guess. This phrase of defund the police and what that might mean. And for some people, a phrase like that might even make them shy away from wanting to get more involved in some way. And so I'm curious what you have to say about that. And I think that also ties in with, in general, people who might not be tuned into this movement for Black lives, as you put it, because of political reasons, because perhaps they have a notion, I have someone's question here, the notion that someone might fire back with something like, Blacks also kill Blacks, or things like this. Sometimes when if you want to try to reach out to your perhaps a little more conservative or a little more wary of this, thinking of it at this movement, maybe a relative of yours or a friend, what would you say to people who have reservations about the idea of Black Lives Matter, and how can we reach out to these people and try to help them see it as something that we're all a part of and that is good for all of us?
So, as I mentioned earlier, Black Lives Matter, there's a lot of things going on saying that it's an organization. It's not an organization. It really seriously started off as a hashtag, and the hashtag grew because it resonated. It resonated with something that was deep within the Black collective consciousness, where, you know, even though we, you know, because history's funny, right? We all know that the winners write history, right? So we have collectively been okay with how the winners have written history. And even though we know what's true about history, and there's even facts of it that, you know, aren't really put into the collective consciousness because on purpose, you know, the biggest issue right now is the fact that this is a historical issue. This is something that didn't just start when Black Lives Matter started to happen. You know, this is stuff that we've been dealing with as Black people since the inception of this nation. And so, you know, we're past the point of feeling like we need to ask for permission to live our lives and to really truly not just be equal on paper, but also be equal in practice as well. And, you know, in terms of defunding the police, I particularly don't like to use that terminology because one, you know, I work with a communications firm, and so I understand the importance of using appropriate language. And so for me, I really see it as this is a reimagining. This is a reimagining of public safety. And if you look at the data, I think, you know, in terms of violent crimes, I believe that violent crimes only take up about, you know, between 2 to 3% of police activity. So the rest of that percent is actually aspects that the police really shouldn't even be doing, because they're, you know, they're really not equipped. It's going.
And it's a burden. It's a burden on them.
Yeah, it's going under the umbrella of policing. But you know, one of the biggest things, because I mean, I speak to everybody, and you know, I listen to messaging, and I hear a lot. You know, police officers are constantly saying, you know, that they deserve the budget and the money that they receive, the financial compensation, because of all the things that they do. But the fact of the matter is that they don't have to do those things, and they shouldn't be doing those things. And to make matters worse, the financial aspects that go into police budgets are often taken away from the actual professionals that do those things. So, you know, we're looking at how we reimagine public safety within our communities. And so, you know, like I said, I don't really particularly like to use defund the police, because I think it's just too much to unpack. It has a lot of baggage. You know, it's similar to, you know, when everyone was just like, you know, gay marriage, and everyone was just like, no, we don't want to call it marriage. Marriage is between a man and a woman. I'm just like, look, you know, you got to meet folks where they are. If they don't want to say marriage, they don't have to call it marriage. I just want my rights, period. That's it. You know, and this is really what this is about. We have deficits of budgets for healthcare, for mental health care, for housing, for education. California has the highest amount of displaced individuals in this nation, you know, and this is what we mean when we talk about defunding the police. But, you know, for me, honestly, it's the same as reallocation of funds, and it's important.
Okay, and what about this, just this question of, you know, people who kind of push back against the idea of Black Lives Matter, or who might dismiss it entirely as, oh, you know, this very politicized movement that, you know, if I hate the Democrats, I'm not going for that, or that kind of thing. What could one do? I mean, what's maybe something someone could do in response to that to try to expand that pool of allies beyond just a political affiliation?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we are living in very polarized times. Yeah. And, you know, we are watching the power of messaging and propaganda at work every single day. And so, essentially, it's similar to this whole thing about wearing masks and not wearing masks. It's like wearing a mask should not be a political statement. That has nothing to do with anything. It's a mask. When you know better to not walk down the street in the middle of the street, otherwise you're going to get hit, right? This is just a matter of common sense. We have a global pandemic that we know very little about. And so it behooves all of us to look at each other in a way that it was like, I respect your humanity, so I'm going to wear a mask. And it's the same principles with, folks being like, oh, I don't believe in Black Lives Matter. Listen to what that just said, right? You don't believe in Black Lives Matter? Why? Because you really, truly don't believe that Black Lives matter. And until we are able to have the same equality as our white peers and counterparts, we will continue to say this because it is something that is necessary. The fact that we were dehumanized to the point where, when people talk about slavery and, the whole aspect of how Africans got here, what we learn about slavery for like maybe 2 days?
Yeah,
a week, and maybe you got more information if you took some Black history studies in college. But right. The reality of this is that there were literally hundreds of slaves packed into a boat, and not being able to move, not being able to get up, do anything. And this is the thing, it's like the Black people were seen as cattle. And the only reason why we were actually given 2/3 of a human was because of the fact of government standing. It was politics. The reason why they gave 2/3 to a Black person, said, okay, a Black person is 2/3 of a person. That was for the benefit of the landowner. That was for the benefit of the slave owner, so that he could have more ability to have clout, political clout, social clout. That's why we were given 2/3 of humanity, not even whole. And so, this is the legacy of this nation. And unfortunately, because we've never done anything to rectify that history, like substantially, like seriously, that this is where we are now. Like, this is a conversation about whether we truly are going to come out of that, that subconscious space of not being seen as human, because that's still real. And that's something that a lot of people don't really want to accept or take in. And it's difficult. It's difficult, I'm sure, for white people. It's difficult for Black people. Like, we have to tell ourselves that we matter. Black Lives Matter is not just about in general. This Black Lives Matter, we're saying this to ourselves. We're saying this so that we can, that we can get up in another day and understand that, despite oppression, despite how we know that these systems are not only made, to not include us really, but they're actually made against us. And despite all this, we have to wake up. We have to go to jobs. We have to live our lives. We have to try to do whatever we can to make these things better. And so, this is a historical conversation in my perspective. It always comes down to education. And honestly, once you put out that education, that's it. The best thing that you can do as an ally is to educate yourself. Educate yourself on the history that was not taught to you in your schools. Educate yourself on the history of what happened, when the 13th Amendment was created, 14th and 15th Amendment was created. What happened when, Lincoln put this in place, but then was assassinated 3 months later? What happened to all of this? 40 acres and a mule? That wasn't a gift. And that only really lasted for about a year. A lot of people, even a lot of Black people, don't understand, like, 40 acres and a mule was a lease. We have still, as Black people who were an extraordinarily large reason why this nation exists, we have never been given the just due that we should have long been received. And so, you know, I tend to say, especially because I'm a communication specialist, stick to the facts, stick with the evidence. And, you know, if people are not going to hear, they're going to have cognitive dissonance. They don't want to believe it. Well, I never owned slaves. Yes, you didn't own slaves, but you know what? You still benefit from the privilege of white supremacy. There is privilege there. It's unseen. You know, you just benefit. Everybody benefits from that if you have white skin. And that's the reality. And so don't spend your time trying to fight people. You just give them the facts, but you have to learn the facts. And I think, you know, the biggest thing right now for a lot of people, because it's still not in the collective consciousness, the mass understanding about policing and the Police Bill of Rights and qualified immunity and police union contracts and campaign financing. Like, this is a huge juggernaut that has really stayed under the radar in so many communities. And I think, honestly, there's, you know, we can start with, you know, incremental change. We can stop this chokehold. We can try to limit use of force. We can do all of these things, but ultimately, if we're not really getting to the core reason of why Black people are getting killed and police officers are going free, we're missing the mark. So educate yourselves on these things.
Great, thank you so much. So I want to give people time to ask some of their questions. I know our time is somewhat limited. So, so let me just address, we had a question just recently. As an older person, not at this time during COVID, not wanting to volunteer in person, is there any group for online mentoring or tutoring kids who are missing out on education right now? Is that even a good idea? I know the answer is yes, but Jasper, do you have anything to say about that?
Well, yes. So one of the things that we do as an organization is we started a Facebook group called Black Lives Matter, Allies Unite. And the group has, you know, I think last I checked, we almost have 20,000 members. And it's a very active group, but you know, the reason I'm partial to this group, and the reason why is because we really are a communications group. You know, we do, you know, people do come in and they do talk about, you know, that they've been on the front lines, they march. We have individuals in there who have lost loved ones at the hands of the police, innocent loved ones. I mean, it's a serious group, and I'm proud of it because we really do, we set the bar. And I think that that's, you know, Ryan and I had a conversation yesterday, and I told him, you know, when we're talking about this movement for Black lives, this is part of it. Part of it is really raising the bar to really start at a space where we don't have to justify us living and being safe anymore. Racism exists. White supremacy is structural, and it creates oppression within our nation. There is implicit bias. And, you know, these are the things that, you know, I think that this is the point where we can stop trying to have these conversations. And this is, you know, and it's hard, right? Because everybody wants to be right. But the fact of the matter is that there is just too much cognitive dissonance. There's too much polarization in the world today for you to actually really sit there and like try to be right about these things. That, you know, stand in the space and the power of truth. Stand in the space of the power of evidence and education. That's why education is so important. So, you know, you don't have to go out in the street and stand on the front lines. I have not been out. This is the first time where there's ever been anything happening for Black Lives Matter or any kind of huge function. I have not been on the street. And the reason why that is because my wife is immune compromised. And so I take that very seriously, especially since we don't know, you know, we don't know what this virus can do. We've only just seen portions of it. So I take that responsibility on. But, you know, I do other things, you know, like listen to my city council meetings and follow the actions of our city council members and the mayor, and what type of things are they trying to pass. Other things, you can volunteer for organizations. As a matter of fact, we have volunteer opportunities for my organization as well, because we do pro bono work. And right now, because we are, really pushing for national recognition of the Black Bill of Rights, there's a lot of work to do. And, that's the thing. There's a lot of work to do in every community right now. But, I will say this, when I think of volunteering, the volunteering that I really appreciate is that, I'm not going to put, someone who has a record of like being a lawyer or someone who knows contracts, or, you can write, you're a writer, journalist, any specialist in any field. I want volunteers to continue to do those things. I want, I'm not going to put people on the same, 19-year-old just starting out trying to understand stuff. It's like this is the type of volunteerism that you can do. And it's just all a matter of whether the organization is really equipped to do that. But, I'm volunteer, please. If you have any special skills, you can go to the website, there's a contact form, you can put your contact information in there, you can tell us your specialties, things that you are passionate about. If you're passionate about anything and you think that you can use that passion and your experience and your skills to benefit organizations that are Black owned and run right now, it's huge, it's important. I mean, and financially as well, financial contributions, 100%. And it's very easy to find, Black businesses within your community. You literally just have to Google it and you'll find them. And most places, most cities have Black Chamber of Commerce's. I'm a member of the Black Chamber of Commerce for Sacramento. And our whole goal is to uplift and empower Black entrepreneurship within Sacramento. So there are always some kind of iteration of that. But yeah, I mean, it just takes a really quick Google. You don't have to leave your home. We want you to stay safe.
Yeah. And while you were talking there, I just put up your organization's website in the chat, as well as Oakland's African American Chamber of Commerce. For those of us, many of us are here in Oakland, but you can Google your own city if you're elsewhere. And a couple other links as well. So
yeah, and you can become members as well. I'm always trying to, being a member of the Black Chamber of Commerce is just so important, especially right now with Black small businesses have taken a huge hit because of COVID. So it's really important that we build awareness around this issue, because I mean, I think last data analysis that I heard, it was roughly 45%, are going under right now.
Yeah.
I mean, actually, we had to pivot our business and streamline it so that we can actually, work in a more streamlined capacity to do workshops, to do panels, webinars. Like this is what we've moved our business model into. But yeah, I mean, we're campaign oriented, webinar oriented, everything is remote, and we're probably going to stay this way for a while. There's no, I mean, yes, being in person with, with people, especially in times of crisis are important, but I think, with where we are right now, and, we're still seeing the lack of consistency and appropriate action from our leaders in the highest rung of our political sector. So, I mean, it's really up to us to maintain the health and, and resilience of our communities.
Good, and I think we have maybe 5 minutes here. Did we have any questions here in the room? Anyone want to ask a question? Or if you're out there on the internet and you want to put something in the chat, you could do that at this time too. Any questions here? Did anyone? Yeah, okay, we have a question here.
Yeah.
So I know maybe not everybody could hear that. So basically, my friend here is saying that you notice this in Oakland, and I know you volunteer in schools, Mary, that depending on the neighborhood you live in, the quality of the schools here could be drastically different. And you see that. You can literally see it driving by the schools. And so you were saying, I'm not sure, you know, what one could do about that. Well, one thing that comes to mind, just one thing we do here at the Lake Merritt is people do volunteering with tutoring help or reading help for kids at schools that are specifically, usually at least on 50% free or reduced lunch, where, you know, it's a school that is mainly serving lower income people. So that's something you can reach out and try to do, and you can do online. That's just one idea here. And if you'd like to contact me about that, you can. You know, you can chat me after this or anything. But yeah, Jasper, any thoughts on that observation?
Yeah, I mean, that's not an uncommon observation. That is pretty much the reality of every single community in every state across the nation. And, you know, I think, you know, when we talk about stuff like, you know, messaging and defunding the police, and, you know, the other thing is reparations. You know, reparations, the term itself kind of has a bad rep in terms of, you know, what it means. But to me, you know, it's not about, you know, getting a check and calling it a day, like, you know, our stimulus checks that we were supposed to get. Okay, $1,200. That's it. You know, that's not what this is. You know, reparations really starts from the structural aspects of our nation. And, you know, I'm definitely a person who believes in going from the micro to the macro and the macro to the micro, which means, you know, if we strengthen our communities, then the nation will be stronger. And so, you know, I am of the impression that right now, what this ultimately for me personally, what this movement for Black Lives really means is building in reparations within the very structural fibers of our communities. And that includes from our local budgets to, you know, even, you know, going into our schools and saying, hey, you know, we need to put a certain percentage amount of our budget annually to assisting you know, underserved community members to be able to get into these schools. And it's not just about scholarships. This isn't about scholarships. This is about actual budgets that everyone in these communities put aside. Your main budget for the entire city, having a percentage of that budget put aside. Universities, the colleges, private schools, budgets, not scholarships, budgets put aside, so that you can actually start to build strength and resilience within your communities, allowing access to those individuals who don't even know that those opportunities exist. Like, this is how we bridge the gap. This is how we really start to build the financial wherewithal within Black communities that we need. You know, and I'll just say this. A lot of people don't know about President Lincoln when he was fighting to get slavery abolished with the 13th Amendment. He created something that was called the Freedmen Bureau. And the Freedmen Bureau was extremely important. The Freedmen Bureau was actually the gatekeepers of the concept of 40 acres and a mule. But aside from that, the Freedmen Bureau was actually responsible for helping slaves find lost family members that they were separated from. They helped folks learn how to read. And they also facilitated the real estate aspects to give this lease to these freed Black slaves that were slaves, right? And the one main thing that Lincoln understood was that the way that you reverse the conversation of Black people not being human is if you give them land, if they had land, because the land was something, the foundation of being able to create generational wealth and legacy. And the fact that Black people have still not been able to do this for this entire time, we have not been able to build generational financial wealth in this nation for over 400 years. When we did, they bombed us, they massacred us, and took our wealth away. You know, this is what we're talking about. This is the reason why I'm saying, you know, education of history, like, not, you know, it's the time of passivity is done. You know, we have to take the initiative. We have to take the initiative to learn about this history. You know, Lincoln had vision. He was a visionary, and he understood that that was necessary in order for us, in order for the nation to change the narratives about Black people not being able to govern or care for ourselves. It was the land. And the fact that we've never had access to land, and what that means is that's the core foundation of all of this, is that we have not been able to build generational wealth for ourselves across the board. So, you know, educate, educate, educate. This is really all that you can do. Don't fight. You don't have to fight. It's about the education. You know the education, so that you can speak with authority when you're in these situations, and then you let it be. And that's what I would say.
Well, I think you've spoken very eloquently, and we want to thank you. I just want to give you the opportunity to say anything else your organization is working on, how people can follow up and learn more about what you're doing, and anything they could do to support that work or the types of causes you're supporting, anything that hasn't been mentioned yet, maybe.
Sure, yeah, I mean, we can absolutely use, we have the petition that we discussed earlier. I put the link in there for change.org. That would be great. I would love to get that, you know, get the numbers as high as we can. I actually am planning on sending this petition over with a letter to Kamala Harris, probably when I get off the phone and get off this webinar. But, you know, now since you all are here, you know, I might just give everyone the opportunity to, you know, sign it and pass it around to folks. But, you know, I think that what we're doing, you know, a lot of organizations are doing a lot of good work. You know, I'm sitting here and I'm saying to you that for me, the Black Bill of Rights is something that's extremely important. And it's a huge project, because essentially what this is taking all aspects of what we've created, every system in this nation that has been built in the construct of white supremacy. The Black Bill of Rights, because we, you know, just to be clear, right? The Bill of Rights is essentially protection within protection. And so that's what this really is. This is the ability to take every single system and structure and reimagine it, re-envision it, and build this as a template for every single aspect of life in America. So it's, like I said, it's education, it's healthcare, bankings and loans, you know, how you're able to buy homes, personal wealth. Like this is a huge project that will probably never end until we get to the point where this is actually adopted for the nation. And I have belief and hope that this will be, because based on history, historical facts and evidence, I mean, this is the time for this to happen. This is what needs to happen, because this fissure of inequality within our nation will never go away. And I think that, you know, the young people who are out there on the front lines right now, and, you know, the allies that are out there on the front lines right now, they know. We all know, we all understand, and people are slowly getting to that place where they understand it too. But you know, this is how we work. You know, find things that you can be passionate about, find things that you can like put your attention in. You know, if you have expertise, volunteer your expertise. Black organizations, Black businesses can definitely use it for sure. So activismarticulated.com, you can fill out the contact form, you can put in your information, how you want to help, and you know, we can go from there. But today, the first thing you can do, the most simplest thing you can do is sign the petition and, you know, push it out to folks in your networks. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Let's all give Jasper a hand. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Ryan. I appreciate it.
We really appreciate your time and all your valuable insights. And so again, that petition's in the chat. All the websites and everything that you might want to check out is there in the chat. And if you're on our email list, I can send you some of those resources too, and direct you to some things.
And I did send you links as well, right, for the op-ed,
yeah,
the B and stuff. Yeah. So if you want to pass that along as well, again, that would be great.
Yeah, Anti-Oppression Network, and yeah, what else was there? Activism Articulated.
Oh, there was I did an op-ed article about the Black Bill of Rights for the Sacramento Bee.
Ah, right. Okay.
I sent those links earlier.
I'll put that up.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming. Really appreciate it. And we'll just leave this window up for a little bit in case you want to jot some things down from the chat there. But thank you for your time, Jasper.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thanks for coming.
we're on the other side, because that's the easy